what I'm going to try to go through today very quickly in about 15 minutes is the physics of conventional RF, the physics of cooled RF, the lesion size and geometry that's being created, and the application to pain management. So, the very basic is we're creating an electrical circuit through the patient's body from the probe that's being inserted. The electric field then passes through the patient's body into the return or the neutral patch that's attached to the outside skin back to the generator. So when the power is turned on, you're creating an electric circuit, and I'll get into some of the details about how it creates a lesion just here at the probe. So how the lesion is formed is it's a function of how dense is the electric field. It's called current density. So here we show what a standard RF probe as though it were in tissue, and these lines emanating are the electric field. So close to the probe, the current density is very high. It'll heat the tissue very quickly, and that's what creates a lesion. And it creates a lesion by what's occurring is the electric field is vibrating molecules, primarily water molecules in the body, and it's called molecular frictional heating. That's what creates the heat to generate the lesion. Again, this is just another depiction of it, but the one aspect of this is that as you move away, the current density drops and it loses its ability to generate heat in the tissue. So as you get, say, even 4 or 5 millimeters out from the probe, you no longer have a strong enough electric field to generate the heat to create a tissue. Now, someone may ask, well, gee, what's happening at the other end of this circuit, the pad that's on the patient's body? That pad is so large that the current density is very low and will not, cause a burn or irritation. There are some exceptions to that, meaning if the pad's not applied very correctly, or if the patient has a lot of body hair and this is applied over the top of it, then it does affect the contact and could show some irritation when you remove the pad. This is getting into the really fun part, and this is so. Basically, our signal is 460 kilohertz of radio frequency energy. The basic physics relationships are the volts are equal to the current times the resistance. What does that do? Then the watts, that's the power, how much you're generating, is the current squared times the resistance of inside the human body. Then joules is a measure of how much total energy, that's watts times time. The number of joules you actually apply to the body is directly proportional to how large that lesion is. And so what we're trying to control is the watts times the time to get a total amount of energy to create a lesion big enough to knock out the nerves we're targeting. I mentioned earlier, as the current moves away from the needle tip, it's very hot around standard RF. Then it starts to cool off because, again, the electric field is getting, the density is getting smaller. So this is just a depiction of how the temperature zones look around the end of the standard RF probe. When you're working in the standard RF, this is what the screen looks like. You set temperature and you set the time. And those are the two main parameters for controlling the lesion size. And so another effect for the lesion size is the length and diameter or the gauge size of the electrode. The larger the electrode, the larger the lesion. And this is just showing a mathematical, the chart of, as you look at how far out, and we're looking at the degrees of centigrade that's being developed. And again, we're looking at the effect of time as you continue, but you notice it reaches an asymptote. When I say too much of a good thing, the tissue immediately surrounding the probe starts to dehydrate. What that means is it's basically the lesion is formed to the point there's very little fluid left in that tissue, and the resistance goes up, so it starts to self-limit how much more energy you can add to that. So there's a natural size that the lesion will grow to, and then it won't grow anymore. All you're doing is now starting to char the tissue, and actually you can, one term is to carbonize the tissue. Okay, so Kimberly-Clark has decided to use an improvement. It's called cooled RF, where you internally cool the RF electrode. This has been used in a couple of other therapies. One is in oncology for treating solid tumors in like liver and organs, soft tissue tumor. The second is in cardiology to ablate circuits, what I call arrhythmic circuits in the heart. And so now we've incorporated into, again, to target nerves along the spinal column. But again, the screenshot here, same type of display, the set temperature and the time of the ablation. These are the defaults that come up on the generator. You might notice that the setting is a slightly lower, 60 degrees rather than a higher temperature, and we'll get into why that's so. This is an advanced screen, such that if you need to make some adjustments can be made. But again, we're not going to get into a lot of the details of the generator here today, but we can later on during the practical part. This is another video. On the left side is a thermal camera, so I'll show you the heat developing. On the right, this is in chicken breast, so you'll see the chicken breast start to cook, is the only way I know how to say that. So again, you can see how this is the hottest spot up near the tip, then the red, but this is again showing how in the actual tissue, how the temperature falls away from as you get further away from the electrode tip. So just to reiterate this, at the very beginning, it's at normal or body temperature, 37 degrees C. And I guess I should point out why this is below that. Because this is cooled, you will get local cooling in the tissue, so the starting temperatures could be around 22 to 25 degrees centigrade. But as time progresses, the heat starts to build, and then when it reaches the temperature set point, the power is leveled off by a control loop in the generator, and it maintains that temperature, but the lesion continues to grow, and the temperature continues to increase there local to the probe. So how cooled RF is really working in standard RF, this is the distance away from the electrode. This is the temperature profile that's being generated. 55 degrees C is, we're taking in our calculations as coagulation threshold. That's a temperature where you're going to, by thermal necrosis, you've destroyed the cells. They're going to, basically, the primary mechanism is it's enough energy that some proteins in the cell wall starts to change conformance, and basically the cell wall loses its ability to pass the ions back and forth that it needs for cellular respiration. So in standard RF, if you recall how I showed that the temperature can reach this asymptote, that natural point is somewhere around 6 millimeters away from the electrode, and that would be the lesion. With cooled RF, by cooling the tip, we keep this tissue up to 2 millimeters out from the tip cooler. We're just ducting the heat away. So it allows us to push more energy in, such that now we shift the peak temperature from the lesion, from the surface of the electrode to 2 millimeters out in the tissue. And what this allows us to do is shift this whole profile further to the right. So we're able to push this lesioning out from around 6 to 7 millimeters out to 14 millimeters. Now, in the real world, this is done at a very consistent substrate, chicken breast. In clinical, you'll still get a much larger lesion, but it won't quite approach 14 millimeters out because of the ligaments, tendons, fat, other tissue types that have different thermal properties. And again, this is just showing how the temperature profile drops off on both sides of the probe. So basically, by pushing or shifting this maximum or peak temperature out away from the probe, the geometry tells us that because it's a cubic relationship, that we're actually increasing the volume of the lesion by 8 times. And so what that does, it allows us to target a much larger area and more likely to get the nerves of interest that you're targeting. Again, chicken breast, same size probes. This is using standard non-cooling, just like a standard RF. This is using the cooling. And so again, just to show the different relative sizes of the lesions being created. Another aspect of the cooling is that it projects more of the lesion forward of the probe. So this is very beneficial for the techniques you'll learn today where it's more of a perpendicular approach rather than a parallel approach to target the nerves. And so again, the fact is you look at conventional RF, we've just depicted two, as the red dots as two nerves being targeted. Because of the smaller size of the standard RF, you may have to make two or multiple passes to get your targeted area. Where with the cooled RF, larger lesion, it's much more likely you're going to get both of those or get that whole area and knock out or ablate those nerves. So how Kimberly-Clark has applied this is three different product types today. It's Synergy System for the sacrum, Thoracool, Lumbricool. And these are three of the techniques we'll be teaching today. And then finally there's this Bipolar RF. Now what this means is that rather than having the return pad attached to the patient's skin, two electrodes are inserted and the circuit will exist just between these two electrodes. What this does, it allows you to create a much larger lesion called a strip lesion. Now with standard RF, again, because there's a self-limiting nature of how large that lesion can be, the probes must be together much closer. For cooled RF, you're able to keep them fairly far apart and create a very large lesion. So again, this is showing for conventional RF and chicken breast, cooled RF, just a different relative lesion size that we're able to create. This technique is being used in Transdisco. So again, two probes are inserted into the disc. This, again, you'll get more information about the angulation and the distance during the rest of the day. But allows you then to create a very large lesion in the posterior aspect of the disc. And again, this is just showing how the temperature profile is generated and the size of the lesion. So just as a quick summary, there are four techniques that are going to be taught today. The Synergy has a 4 millimeter active tip, a standard set temperature of 60 degrees. So when you just turn on the generator, it would be 60 degrees, 2.5 minutes, and a ramp rate of 80 degrees centigrade. Thoracool has a larger tip because the anatomy calls for a larger lesion. Again, Lumbricool is much more like Synergy. Transdiscal is our largest tip, but so that we can get a much larger lesion in the disc. And again, these are the system components we have on display here if you have further questions. The generator, the cooling pump, the delivery set, the probe.